All right, so this next drawing, we're still in 2-point perspective, but now we're putting ourselves inside the box. So this is where some students get a little bit confused because we're used to drawing buildings from the outside where we start with the corner that's closest to us and then work our way back toward the vanishing points on the side planes. But in this case, we're going to be starting with the farthest corner of the room. So we're doing the smallest line first, and then we're going to be building the walls out towards us. So they'll be getting larger as they move towards us instead of getting smaller as they move away from us. So that's a little confusing to some people. I've gone ahead and attached a piece of newsprint to my template. So I have a 1-inch grid underneath my paper, and I've got my vanishing points clear off to the side here. So make sure that they're not on the actual piece of paper that you're planning to be drawing your buildings on. So I've moved my vanishing point 6 to 8 inches outside of my paper. This is about a 17-inch distance, and so I want to take 1/3 to 1/2 of that distance and make sure each of the vanishing points is moved a similar distance off the sides of the paper. I'm going to go ahead and put in the horizon line, and for the sake of the demo I'm going to be using a different color for each vanishing point, at least initially, so that you can get used to figuring out which lines lead to which vanishing point. The farther your vanishing points are, the less extreme those vanishing line angles are, and so sometimes it's easy to get them confused with your horizon line, and it's hard to just tell with the naked eye which vanishing point it's leading to. So I'm going to color code it for this example at least, so that you aren't getting confused about which vanishing point to lead your particular lines to. For my horizon line though, I'm going to do a dotted line. It's really easy to get your horizon line in the way of some of your other measuring lines. So in this case, I'm just going to use a dotted line so that I don't accidentally think that this is one of my dividing lines when I'm measuring the side plane of the walls. All right, so I've drawn that in as a dotted line. And then since we need to expand the room out towards us and we want to have plenty of room for the floor plane and the ceiling plane, we're going to make that back wall really tiny in our drawing. So I don't want you to draw your back corner, you know, huge, because then by the time you extend the walls out, you're only going to have this much floor or that much ceiling to deal with. So we want to make sure that we start small. And I'm going to shift mine. I don't want it dead center. I want to show you what happens when we're kind of not completely symmetrical in our composition. So I'm going to shift just a little bit to the left of center, and I'm going to draw my line about 3 to 4 inches tall. So let me put, I think I'm going to keep it pretty centered. I was thinking, do I want to show more ceiling or more floor? But I think I'll do, why don't we do about 2 inches above the horizon line and 1 inch below the horizon line. So that's about where the back corner of my room is going to be. And now to start building the walls out, we're going to use our left vanishing point to draw the right wall. So from the bottom and the top of that back corner of the room, we're going to use the left vanishing point for both of those lines. So I'll put those in with our blue pencil. And then to build the right wall of the room, we need to use, to build the left wall of the room, we need to use our right vanishing point. So line it up with our right vanishing point here. I'm going to switch to red just to kind of help us keep straight which vanishing point we use. Eventually I'm going to be zooming in on this drawing, and you're not going to be able to see the actual pins that I'm using to line up my pencil with. So the color is what you'll be using to help you remember. Red will be for the right vanishing point, and blue will be for our left vanishing point. All right, so we've got a side wall, the right wall, ceiling, and the floor area. And now I want to start to divide one of the side walls. What we'll be doing is we'll be dividing it into horizontal sections first, and then we're going to be using the diagonal line to divide it into columns as well. And once you have that divided out, we can use it for a lot of different things. We can use it to place doorways. If we have multiple doorways on the same wall that have the same height, we can use those divisions to make sure the doors are convincing width. Or we can project those lines down across the floor or up across the ceiling to help us position things like floor to ceiling walls or columns, and so we'll show you a couple of those things. So what I want you to do first, once you've got your two walls drawn, is we're going to be dividing this wall into, let's shoot for 8 sections. So what you can do, if you happen to have 8 inches here, that's perfect. If you can find a spot along the way, so as long as you keep your ruler or your straight edge absolutely vertical, you can slide it anywhere along this receding plane until you get to a number that is easily divisible by however many sections you need. So if we're aiming for 8 sections, if you can find a spot where it's 4 inches, on mine it's 3 inches here, so I need to slide it out until I get to a 4-inch section. And again, it's really important that you keep this vertical, because if you're doing something like this, it's going to throw off all your measurements. So try to keep it truly straight up and down. And I need to slide mine right about here. So I've got perfect 4 inches here. So I want 8 different sections. I'm going to just mark every ½ inch. So be as precise as you can as you're making these marks. If you're real sloppy, some of your sections will be bigger than others, and then when you go to use the diagonal, it's going to also throw off your vertical measurements. So take your time and really use a small dot so that you have a very precise landmark to aim for. So I've drawn in our little dividing dots here, and now since we built this wall using our left vanishing point, we need to use that same vanishing point when we're dividing all those points with horizontal lines. So coming back to our left vanishing point and using, I'm going to use the blue pencil. Of course, you guys don't need to change color in your drawings, but if you have colored pencils, it may help you keep things straight. So I'm trying to be as accurate as I can. I want to go exactly through these dots. I also want to make sure I don't accidentally use my horizon line as one of my dividing points, unless it does happen to hit right where one of those dots lies. Now this is the same process we used in 1-point perspective when we were drawing those steps. Remember, we divided off the horizontal sections of the steps, and then we used the diagonal line, and everywhere that diagonal intersected one of our horizontal lines, that's where we added in a vertical line. So we're going to do that exact same thing. We're going to go from one corner of the room to the other corner of the room with a perfect diagonal, and everywhere that that diagonal line crosses one of our blue lines that we just drew, we're going to bring in a vertical line. So I'm going to put a dot everywhere that this diagonal crosses. So again, this is just a measuring line. This is not a perspective line, but it is a construction line, so we're allowed to use it in perspective. I've drawn pretty lightly, but I'll put a black dot each spot where that diagonal is crossing my blue dividing lines. And at this point I need to ignore those original measurement lines if they are in different spots. So be as accurate as you can. Again, if you're doing this right, the column should be pretty narrow back here in the back corner of the room, and they should be getting wider and wider and wider as they come out this way. You can't just take your ruler and start dividing along here, or else they'll all seem to be the same width, which in real life they should seem to get smaller. So you do need to use this diagonal anytime you're dividing something in 2-point perspective. The only lines that we're able to measure directly off of a ruler would be vertical lines. So you're not allowed to just use a ruler on anything that's moving away from us in space. This area is perpendicular to us. It's not sloping away from us, so that's the only spot that we can just use the ruler and take literal measurements off of the straight edge. So through each one of those points, and here it's important to try to keep your lines as truly vertical as you can. So I've got my grid paper under here. If you have a T-square, that's even better. I'm going to go ahead and just carefully draw in each one of those vertical lines, and I'm looking on both sides of my ruler to try to keep all the lines parallel to one another. And I want to go right through the very center of each dot so that I'm not adding distortion to my drawing by being kind of sloppy with it. Okay, so we should have the same number of columns as we have rows if we do this right. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That looks good. Now what we can do is let's add some doorways here. So if this were a single-story interior, let's say we're in some sort of office building or something, let's imagine how tall someone might be. So again, we can at this point decide how much height we want this to represent. Let's say we want it to be about a 10-foot ceiling this time. So if we have someone who is, let's say it's a 5-foot tall person, again you can kind of keep this sloppy, but a 5-foot tall person would be about maybe halfway up the wall there. So we want the doorways to be taller than that person is. So what I want you to do is just pick, why don't we pick a couple of these columns and we're going to turn 2 of them into doors. Let's space them out a little bit. We're going to end up opening one of the doors in toward the room, and we're going to open the other door out into the hallway. So make sure that you're not picking 2 that might block one another. I'm going to take this third section and turn it into one of the doorways. So I want to make sure that so this would be, you know, this particular guy's eye level. It doesn't always have to be the same eye level as your horizon line. What could be some situations, like in this situation, if the guy's head is above our horizon line, it implies that the viewer is actually sitting or is shorter than the people that we're seeing in the scene. But if our eye level is hitting about his waist, that means that even out here in the room, this line where the horizon line is represents sort of waist height for anything that's in the room. So if there was a person standing out here, you know, his head still would be pretty much along the same line where his height is back at the back wall. So it kind of gives you an idea of how large to make things if they're out here in the room. So I'm going to darken in, let's make this be one of the doorways, so we can just kind of darken that in as a little more distinct shape. And then I want you to keep the second door the same height as this first door that we drew. So here's one, and then let's move another one out. I'm going to skip 2 columns and we're going to put the second doorway out here. So you want to make sure that if we lined up the left vanishing point with the top of the door, both doors need to be along that same line. Okay, so I'm going to darken those actually with a pen, I think. Let me get a pen in here just so we can see it a little better in the video. Now, this might be a mistake. When I come to opening the doors, I might end up having some permanent lines that I can't erase very well, but I want you to be able to see as I'm constructing this. So okay, so we've cut the hole, but we do want to show that the walls have some thickness too. So when we constructed this wall, we were using the left vanishing point almost exclusively. Now that we're trying to show the thickness of the walls, we need to switch back to our right vanishing point. So we're going to use our red pencil, and we're going to go from, I'm going to just draw some arrows here so you know exactly what I'm talking about, which corners need to be the inner corners of the wall that would be seen. And then from these 4 points, we're going to be extending lines to our right vanishing point. Now I want both the walls for both doors to feel like they're the same wall. So you can't just randomly pick a width for one and then not you know, use that as a reference for the other one. Why don't we start with the larger door, because it'll be a little bit easier to see the marks. And I'm going to extend in vanishing lines to our right vanishing point from the top and the bottom of that doorway. And then we're going to add in the thickness with another vertical line. So for this first door, you can choose how deep you want that to be, but then we're going to be using perspective to apply that same thickness to the second door. So don't just do anything on this door yet. We're going to finish this one off first, and then we're going to extend vanishing lines back so we know exactly how thick the wall would be as we get farther back into the room. So we've used the right vanishing point for the top and the bottom angle of that door. Now to finish it off, we're going to go from this point and this point, and we need to switch back again to our left vanishing point to finish off the top and the bottom of the doorway. So I'll switch back to my blue pencil for that part. And actually, while we're here, since we know that this doorway and the one that's farther away are going to share that same line, I can go ahead and extend that back. We just don't know how far it needs to go yet, so we have to kind of keep it light for a minute there. And same thing with the bottom. We know it has to go through this dot. It also has to line up with our left vanishing point, so we darken that in. That's the threshold that you would step over to get into the room. And the second doorway would share the same line. So now to finish these off, all we need to do is, from these first red arrows that we drew in, we're going to switch back to our right vanishing point and the red pencil. And wherever this corner, wherever that vanishing line meets the blue line that I just drew, that's where the thickness of that door needs to be. So let's start at the top here first. And the bottom. And then we'll add in the, wherever those 2 points meet is where we need to add in the vertical there. So we've got 2 doorways now, and if you want to add a little bit of shading, you could even use perspective lines if you wanted to, but just to show that this would be the undercut of the wall, you know, the opening above our heads, and then this is the side wall. Now, if this wall continues into that second room, if this is one great big room, it could be sharing the same wall. So we could extend these red lines into this opening and into that opening. If you want to feel like it's 2 separate rooms, then you could have a separate wall that's maybe a little bit lower in this room. So you decide whether you want these to feel like little hallways or whether you want them all to share the same wall that this room that we're in has. I'm just going to use these red lines that I already have from the main room, and I'm just going to extend them into both of those rooms, as if both of these doors go into one large conference room or something. So that's the ceiling, that's the floor line extending into the second room, and now we'll do the ceiling. Now I can only see a tiny little corner of the ceiling through this first door, but by the time we get to that second door, we would see a lot more of that wall. So again, these lines represent the floor and the ceiling of the main room, continuing on into those second room that has 2 different doors to it. Now let's take one of these doors, and right now there's no door on that doorway. We're gonna take a door, and we'll pretend that it hinges, you know, along this edge for this door, and we're gonna swing it out into the room that we're in. So what happens there is, if the door is swung out, so let's say this is the wall, if the door swings out to a 90-degree angle, we just end up using the other vanishing point because the angles are at a 90-degree angle. If we want it to feel like the door swung all the way open, like 180 degrees, and is flat against the wall, then we just still use the vanishing point that we used when we constructed that wall in the first place. So I think it's going to show up better if we can have it actually feel like it's just swung halfway out into the room. So why don't we take, trying to figure out which one might be best to do this for. So I'm gonna swing one out from this edge. And so what we'll do is we'll just use our right vanishing point. So we're using the red pencil for this, and we're just extending it out. Now, it's not, I'm trying to think if it would stick out any further than this. I'm guessing it would probably be just about exactly where the second line is, but I'm just estimating at this point. So I'm going to just take the red line, and the door should appear to be getting bigger as it swings out into the room since it's closer to us. And then we will, again, we're kind of estimating on the width. I think this is a pretty good guess. So I'm just going to go ahead and put a vertical line in here to represent the edge of the door that's closest to us. And then we also want the door to feel like it has some thickness. So we're going to switch back to our left vanishing point now. and use the blue pencil to show how thick the door is. So it's not going to be super thick. I'm just going to make it look like it's maybe a couple inches, I don't know, maybe a real door is 1.5 inches or 2 inches thick. So we're going to use our vanishing point on the left side to draw some little angles there. So they can't be horizontal lines. They do have to slope down. The problem is that we're fairly close to our horizon line, so these lines seem like they're almost horizontal, but they're not really. They still are vanishing lines leading to our left vanishing point. Once you've drawn the thickness of the door at the top and the bottom, we're just going to connect it with another vertical. And if you want to add a doorknob, that'd be great. So I always think a little bit of shading sometimes helps clarify the plane changes. So you could draw that. And if you wanted to draw a doorknob, doorknobs are often kind of at hip height, so you might just estimate on him where a doorknob might be, and you can just sort of imagine if it were a cylinder on its side, you know, you might see a tiny bit of the doorknob on the far side too. So we've got a door that's swung out 90 degrees into the room. And then if there were a door, let's say on the other doorway, let's say the door swings the other direction. So in that case, we'd be extending the door into the room, following those red guidelines towards our right vanishing point. So if you want to, most of the door would be hidden by the doorway, but you could draw that in as if there's a door swinging into that room. It's not going to show up very well because, you know, we would have a hinge here. The doorknob would probably be out of sight inside the room, and really all we see of the door is this angle here. So that one isn't quite as descriptive as the one that's coming out into the room for us, towards us. All right, so I do want to show you how to do a column. What I want to do is make sure, I actually want to get two columns in here that relate to one another. So let's use, actually I think what's going to be helpful is to extend some of these lines that we drew in originally, these 8 vertical lines. Let's find where they hit the bottom of the wall. So if you can relocate them and maybe draw a dot. This one, the door is kind of covering it, but I'm going to go ahead and draw a dot there. Here, here, here. If you've got too much information in here, you might double check where those hit at the top. That'll be maybe a better reference for where we need them here. So you should have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then we'll use this as 1, 2. So those are spots where we've got even vertical divisions, and we're going to extend them out across the floor plane now so that we can project 2 floor to ceiling columns that are the same, hopefully the same size. So they'll appear to be, the close one will appear to be much larger, the farther one will appear smaller, but they should look like they in real life could have been the same size pillars. So we're going to use our red pencil, and we're going to be extending lines out across the floor. So what I'm doing is going through my right vanishing point through each one of these 8 dots, and I'm going to be extending lines out into the floor towards us. So we're going to end up with a whole bunch of kind of like diamond shapes when we're all done here. So be as careful as you can to line up those points pretty precisely. They should be getting closer and closer together as they approach that back wall if you're doing it right. Remember, you're not allowed to just use your ruler to break up those distances. They just won't look right. Yeah, so you can see how small the sections get way back here in the room, and then they're much wider here. Now if we wanted to, so we do have a dot here I forgot to connect. And really there should be a couple extra ones. If you really wanted to figure out where those lines are, what we could do is we could extend another diagonal through and or shift and yeah, go through. I'm trying to think of the easiest way to do this where you won't get confused. Well, we can go in either direction, but I think, why don't we do this? We'll just keep it consistent. So I'm going to just jump over 3 steps and I'm going to look for these intersecting points. So each time one of the verticals crosses those same original dividing lines, we could add a new diagonal in there that extends it off the page a little bit further, so we know where those next steps would be. So I just need to extend my blue lines out a little bit further here. My ruler's not quite long enough, so I'm just going to have to line it up with the line that I've already drawn there. Again, you don't need to do these last few extensions, but I'm just showing you how to do it if you are curious. It's a little bit more involved. So again, these will align with the left vanishing point. It's just that my ruler's too short to do it all in one. So we would have another one that hits here that would bring a vertical down to, and then we would have to come through from the right vanishing point through this spot where it would have hit the extended ground plane, and it looks like that would be all we would see. So things really get more distorted as we get close to that vanishing point, but that would be where the next line would be. It would actually have to go through that point if you're curious. All right, so let's put in a couple of columns. I think I'd like to keep them off to the side a little bit so we can still see our doorways. I don't want to block our doors too much. So why don't we choose a spot right about here, like right below that corner of your room, but to the left of the doors. And we're going to just draw 2 lines leading to our left vanishing point, and we're going to use 2 of these red lines that we've already got drawn, so they're already leading to our right vanishing point. So I'm just going to make a tiny, it's going to be a pretty small diamond shape, and I want to try to keep it away from hitting right where our other lines are going to hit. So I'm lined up with my left vanishing point. I'm going to draw 1 line, and then I'm going to shift just so I'm keeping it on the left vanishing point. We'll get the other line. So we've got 2 lines kind of leading, let's say north and south, 2 lines that are the red lines that are leading east and west. So we have the footprint of one of our columns. Now the trick is going to be extending it up. This is the same steps that we used when we did the bookshelf in 1-point perspective. We're going to lead them up, and in order to figure out where they would actually hit the ceiling, we're going to be tracking 2 of the lines back all the way up to the ceiling and back across. So I'm going to draw that in, maybe in another color. Let's see if I can get, use a highlighter. It's going to get really colorful. So I'm using my right vanishing point. I'm tracking, I just wanted to show you how I'm tracking the line. So we're going to be following this yellow line until it hits the wall. So we're following it across the floor, it hits the wall, it tracks up the wall, and when it hits the ceiling, it's got to track back using the same vanishing point. So I'll track both the front and the back of this diamond shape to the wall. So we'll kind of follow the arrows here. When it hits the bottom where the wall meets the floor, then it tracks up the wall until it hits the spot where the wall hits the ceiling. So we go up these lines, and this one's kind of hidden by the door a little bit, but it happens to lie right behind that front edge of the door. So we're going up these yellow lines, and we hit the ceiling right here. So I'm going to draw a couple circles here for you, draw little arrows. So we hit the ceiling here. I'm going to just draw some little bit darker arrow lines so you know exactly how we're finding this first column. So we track the front edge here, and then once we get to the ceiling, we've got to track it back across the ceiling. So it's going to expand out again, and we need to use the right vanishing points since, you know, this part of the room is heading east and west. We're going to, wherever that tracking line hit the ceiling, we're going to extend it back out in perspective using the right vanishing point into the room. And we just need to get to the point where we're right above. We're going to track both those points. So here's the second line. So we track across the wall, up the ceiling, and now we come back out into the ceiling. I'll just draw in yellow too so you can see these are the tracking lines. So we're coming back out onto the ceiling, and we won't know where to stop until we extend our verticals up. So from each one of those four corners of this footprint of our column, we're going to extend verticals up and try to keep it as truly vertical as you can. I'm looking at the edge of my paper, I'm looking at my guidelines underneath here, and I only have to go as far as these two lines. So we'll figure out exactly where those end in a minute here, but we're kind of paying attention. This upper one represents the front edge of the column, and this back one is going to represent the back edge of the column where it hits the ceiling. So I'm going to bring all four lines up. The one that's hidden in real life I'll draw as a dotted line so we don't get too confused, but this front one would be nice and dark, and then the right edge is very close to where the corner of the room is. Yours might end up hitting right on that corner. It may not look exactly like mine. And then there's one spot here, which is the back corner of the post. And so since it's the hidden edge, I'm going to draw that as a dotted line so we don't get too confused there. All right, now here we've got to finish this off. So we know if we track this along, the front corner is going to be right here, right? The highest part on the ceiling should be that one. This one is already completed, so this is the front edge of the column. This corner is the opposite of this one. You know, whatever happens on the ground plane, we have the same thing happening here. So to complete this, we need to draw some dotted lines back to our left vanishing point. They'll be hidden in the real object, but it's good to know where they are so that we can locate the back corner. So I'll draw that as a dotted line, and it would stop right where this back corner is. That's the, since we've got the dotted line here, that's the back corner of the block. And then this would actually be just a dotted line since it's a hidden part of the column. And then we would finish up, we'd find that last edge by coming back to our left vanishing point. And if we were pretty accurate with our verticals, they should line up pretty closely right here. So this is the the left edge of the column. This is the right side of the column. If you wanted to turn that into a bookshelf, you guys could do that. So let's say the shelving is coming in this way. We'd use our left vanishing point to draw the divisions of the shelves, and then we'd have to switch to our right vanishing point to draw the underside of the shelves that are above our eye level and the upper side of the shelves that are below our eye level. But it's really the exact same steps that we used in 1-point perspective. It's just that we're not allowed to use those horizontal lines. So anything that had been horizontal in 1 point now has to lead to either the left vanishing point or the right. You choose which one, just use it consistently. So I don't know if I'm going to be able to lighten this much. These really would be hidden lines, but because I drew them in colored pencil, I'm not going to be able to get rid of them very easily, but I might be able to lighten them a tiny bit just so that you can see there. Yeah, it doesn't erase very well. And then these lines too would probably be erased, but we could darken that in a little bit. So let's put in a second column. What I want to do now is we know exactly where we have the contact with the ceiling, contact with the floor. So let's use our same vanishing point, and we'll just choose another section a little further back to draw a second one in. So I'm gonna move it off to the side here, but I'm gonna lightly extend these guidelines with the blue pencil so we know how wide that column needs to be when it's back here. I'm drawing it pretty lightly because I can't erase this very well, but I want you to be able to see it hopefully still. And we'll do the same thing with the ceiling. We don't have as many guidelines on the ceiling yet, but these two should really help us. All right, so what we want to do now is choose, we've got a few choices here. I'm going to choose one that's far enough away that we can see some space between the two columns. And I think at this point I'm going to pause and zoom in a little bit so that we can really see what's going on here a little bit closer. It means we aren't going to be able to see our right and left vanishing points, but I'll try to tell you which one I'm using, and we'll have the color coding still going on as we get closer. But I'm just afraid we're a little too far away to see all the detail of what's going on here. All right, let's see how this works. So I'm going to darken in the footprint of that second let me darken this one in a little bit first, just so you see this is the visible part of that column. And then we're following back, and I'm going to choose maybe this smaller one back here. So I'm just going to darken in. We've got two lines that are leading to our left vanishing point. So those are the two that I just drew in darker. And then these two will lead to our right vanishing point. I'm going to draw them in black anyway, just so that we can see them a little bit better. This one will be a dotted line since it's hidden. And this one actually would be dotted to this back side. It'll be the hidden side of the column. And then from these 3 points of the diamond, we're going to extend lines straight up. And we're going to stop when we get to these blue guidelines that are drawn in here. So I'm trying to be as careful as I can to make sure my lines are staying pretty vertical. I'll shorten these a little bit when we know for sure where to stop the top of the column, but for now I'm just going to draw them straight up and down. All right, and then the dotted one is our back corner of the column. It's still kind of important to think about where that is because it does affect how the construction at the top of the column happens. So, okay, so now what we're doing is we want to make sure that the top of the second column hits the ceiling at the same spots that the first column hits. So I'm going to be following these blue lines back to our left vanishing point. And I'm going to pay attention to like which side of the column is. So let's just do this. I'm going to do a little bit of hatching just so it's a little easier to tell what we're looking at here. This is the side that leads to the left vanishing point. This other side is the side that leads to the right vanishing point. And once we track this down, we'll know where the top of that other one is. So we're going to find that corner right here. So this is the front top corner. We can darken in that line a little bit there. So from this point now, where this vertical line meets this vanishing line that's a left vanishing line, we're going to go from this point back to our right vanishing point with our red pencil. So it's sloping downward toward our right vanishing point. It's going to end right here because that's where the side of that back part of the column is. And so this would be the right side of that second column. Hopefully that's clear enough that you can see it in your drawing completely. And you could add as many columns as you wanted, so we could extend columns out. If we keep the spacing the same, we know that let me zoom out again a little bit so you can see what I'm talking about here. All right, so let's say we wanted to add some more columns here. We could just extend the base of the columns out this way, and I would extend both sides, so the far side of the column and then the close side of the column. And then if you wanted them evenly spaced, if there's two spaces between these two columns, you could just skip 2 spaces and then make the footprint of this next one here. And then we can track it across to the ceiling and back up, and we can extend, you know, the top of the columns out, the front edge, and then a dotted line for the back edge. And wherever those lines intersect our verticals, you know, you can do as many columns as you'd want. So there's a really kind of a perfect way to make that spacing really believable in your drawing. All right, I think that's probably a good spot to stop. I would just, you know, clean up any lines that you can. Mine, because it's all drawn in colored pencil, I can't really lighten things very well now. But in your drawing, I would like you to darken the lines that are the actual room and lighten the lines that are construction lines when you're done, so that it's really clear for the viewer to see what's going on. So for example, here, if that door is open, I would maybe do some erasing of these lines so that the door shows up a little bit better, darkening in contours so that it's really clear to the viewer which parts are the actual objects. All right, I'm going to stop there. Good luck on the drawing.